I Will Make You Proud by Where Does She Go? Read to you by Hummingbird Audio. Trigger warning. This fic includes talk of suicide, talk of abuse, and potential sexual content. Please read with care. Chapter 27, Moth to a Flame. Hermione, November 1998. Hermione and Draco only just made it off the staircase and into her bed before their mouths and hands found each other again. Throughout that night, Hermione found that her appetite for Draco Malfoy knew no bounds. She didn't care that she was tender and sore as she lay underneath him for the third time, lacing her fingers around his neck as he slid hard, slick inside her. And when she awoke, a few hours later, she wasn't able to stop herself from kissing him awake and climbing back on top of him. The night took on a dreamlike quality for Hermione, passion and a dull, pleasurable pain taking over all her rational thought. Finally, around 7 a.m., Draco was spent. He fell asleep on top of her, and she felt him gradually get heavier and heavier. She looked down at him, and he was dead to the world, his breathing slow and even, the fingers of one hand tangled possessively in her hair, the other resting splayed over her hip. She watched as his face relaxed, his lips pouted. He looked so peaceful, she couldn't wake him. Hermione stroked her fingers gently over Draco's back, careful to avoid the many scars and slashes that marred his soft skin. She bit her tongue to keep from crying at the sheer number of them. She let her own eyes finally drift shut, breathing deeply to take in the scent of him that permeated her bedroom, his own brand of dark, enticing magic. She eventually dropped down into a deep, exhausted sleep. They both finally woke around 11 a.m. Hermione opened her eyes to find Draco already watching her. His gray eyes were cloudy with exhaustion. His hair stuck up at all angles, his lips looked pink and chapped. And was that a bite mark on his shoulder? Had she actually bitten him? Hermione felt her face redden at the memory of her teeth sinking into his soft skin of his neck as she had rocked on top of him, his hands gripping her hard, her own fingers fisted in his hair. He smiled at her, a low, seductive smile, and Hermione felt it again, that new stirring, low in her belly, that she had never had before, but that Draco seemed to inspire with only a look. She shifted and felt soreness between her legs, but pulled him to her anyway, unable to resist the sight of him, hard and ready for her again. Draco was gentle as he moved between her hips and slowly guided himself inside her, this time without the urgency of the night before. He took his time, bringing 2 of his fingers to his mouth and sucking them, running his tongue over them, before lowering his hand between their bodies and sliding his wet fingers over the sensitive bundle of nerves between Hermione's legs, making her moan as she clenched hard around him. She felt herself begin to lose control almost immediately as his fingers sent small sparks of pleasure shooting through her entire body. The feel of them, along with the sensation of Draco thrusting deep and slow inside her in a painfully perfect rhythm that was too much. She forgot to be embarrassed as her eyes rolled back in her head and she moaned his name, arching her back and gripping onto the bedsheets as she shook and twitched around him. Draco watched her, his eyes half closed, with pleasure never left her face. He looked as though he were committing the moment to memory, taking in every second. Hermione squeezed hard as she felt him begin to come to, his strokes getting faster, his hips snapping harder against hers, and his throbbing release came, pulsing in with her own. Draco leaned over her, his forearms either side of her head, kissing her gently, his breath ragged and her hair sticking to his face as they both slowly recovered. After a few minutes, he rolled off her and lay flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling for a while. He seemed to be deep in thought, and Hermione watched him, suddenly unsure about what he might say. Previously to his very welcome appearance outside her window in the middle of the night, it had seemed like he couldn't wait to get away from her. He had practically thrown her out of the manor. After nearly 10 minutes of agonizing silence, he spoke, so quietly that Hermione had to strain to hear him. "I'm so sorry about yesterday, Granger. That was shitty of me." She leaned up on her elbow so that she was looking down at him. Draco's face was pinched, like he was in pain. "Draco." His eyes were wary as he looked up at her. "Do you want to talk to me about what happened at breakfast?" She probed gently, cautiously. "Has it happened before?" She could see the shutters come down immediately, the dulling of the silver, the light disappearing from his eyes with one blink. "Granger." His tone was a warning. "Nothing happened." She held his gaze, but got nothing back. He had blocked her out completely. She waited, hoping that her silence would prompt him to talk, but his eyes were flat. He was resolute. "Draco, maybe I can help if you just let me understand." He sighed. "Some things you don't want to know, Granger," he said. "Even you can't always have the answers to everything." Hermione felt a twist in her chest as she looked at the hurt in his face. She felt like he had done something he was deeply uncomfortable with when he let her see his memories. He had taken a huge risk when he had given her access to parts of his hidden life. But he was still holding back. What could be so bad that he wouldn't tell her? She realized that Draco had spent his whole life keeping secrets. He was a master of lies, of showing one thing while covertly doing another. She could only hope that at some point he trusted her enough to let her in. Hermione suddenly felt overwhelmed by all of it, by him. She thought again about the magnitude of Draco's actions, all the terrible and difficult things that had made him who he was. She felt her throat tighten and blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Draco reached a hand up to catch a hold of her jaw. He kissed her softly, then moved to kiss over her face, his lips capturing her salty tears. He pulled her close, hugging her tightly. She cried into his chest, wishing that things had been different, that they had been different. "I don't want this to end," she said a few minutes later when she could catch her breath. "I don't want you to leave." He released her, pulling back so that he could look at her. He rubbed a hand over his face, a mannerism she was already beginning to recognize as stress. His voice was quiet as he met her eyes. "I can't tell you how much I want this, Granger. It's been pretty much all I've wanted since I was 11. Hermione felt her stomach swoop. Since he was 11. But Draco sat up and pulled away from her slightly. "I'm not 11 anymore. I'm not naive enough to think that wanting something badly enough means that you get it." He suddenly gave a bitter laugh that made Hermione's guts twist. There are things I've wanted so fucking much in my life. And I know now that no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you fight for it, sometimes those things will just never happen. Hermione knew somehow that he wasn't only talking about her. Granger. He said her name, and she didn't like the sound of it. It sounded like doubt. How do you think this would work? He stood and looked at her, holding his arms out. I am the focus of the wizarding world right now. Front page fucking news. Everyone knows who I am and what I've done. He indicated his arm where the mark she had avoided looking at was still there, as noticeable as ever, despite fading color. Do you really think your friends are going to just accept me? After what happened at Hogwarts? Dumbledore? All the years of bad blood between me and Potter? They won't forgive you for this, Granger. He shrugged. I can't do that to you. Hermione felt the beginnings of fear. Draco, they're my friends. They care about me. They won't turn their backs on me. He clenched his jaw hard. Anyone can turn their back on you, Hermione. I won't be responsible for ruining your life, your reputation. Do you really think they'll let you be an aura if they know you slept with the first person you interviewed? A person that is technically a mass murderer? She had been about to argue with him, but now her mouth snapped shut. All she had wanted for years was to become an aura, and he was right. He wasn't just anyone. He was Draco Malfoy. And despite the fact of who he had killed, the point was he had killed. And Hermione knew. He'd done it with no remorse, no hesitation. So why did you come here then? She said, and she felt more tears slip down her cheeks. Why did you let me do this? Feel this? If you're just going to walk away and leave me. She felt pathetic for what she said next, but it was the truth. It's not fair. Draco looked at her with so much sadness and bitterness in his eyes. It hurt her to see. Yes, I'm a terrible person. He spoke through gritted teeth. I lost control and let how badly I wanted you take over the fact that I know I'm fucking poison. I'll only end up hurting you. I shouldn't have come. Hermione felt a flash of anger then. It was more than anger. It was a burning rage that suddenly flamed through her body. No! Draco jerked in surprise, his eyes wide as she rose to stand, her fury firing her blood. You don't get to do this, Draco. Granger, stop always thinking you get to make the rules on who you are. You've done that since we were 11, put barriers up between us. But I know now, Draco. I know who you are under the facade you put up. And I want this. I want you. Hermione was breathing hard, shocked by the strength of the emotions she was feeling. How was she already so consumed by him? It had been a matter of days since he had come back into her life, but she already knew she couldn't just carry on as if it had never happened. He sat up, shifting onto the side of the bed, and dropped his head to his hands. Hermione didn't know what to do to convince him that she didn't care who he was or what he'd done anymore, that she would take him any way she could get him. She thought about the last few years of her life. She had spent them so focused on other people, on keeping them safe, on making them happy. She cared so much about her friends. And she knew they cared about her, but she couldn't remember the last time she had done something just for her. The past year, she had been working for Professor McGonagall in her spare time, making healing potions, Skelly Grow, Blood Replenisher, Pepper Up, simple, commonly used potions, making them in big batches, ensuring that they had plenty in reserve for the wounded after skirmishes and attacks. She had also supported Harry through his grief over losing first Sirius and then Dumbledore. Harry had not coped well with either and had been on his way down a very bad path before Hermione had realized quite how much he was hiding things. Unbeknownst to her and Ron, Harry had spent much of 6th and 7th year highly dependent on Dreamless Sleep potion, procuring it from a dark witch he had found in Nocturne Alley. He had gotten to the point where he couldn't sleep without it, and even with it, he was managing only an hour or two, going slowly insane with lack of sleep. He had begun experimenting with other, more potent potions, also bought from the same dark witch, and Hermione had found him almost unconscious one night, his eyes rolling back in his head, battered and bruised where he had fallen down on his way back to the common room. She couldn't believe the risk he was putting himself in, when everyone was fighting to protect him, and had started getting angry before she saw how much he was struggling. Harry couldn't even tell her his own name, but he could cry for his lost uncle and mentor. Hermione had thought about just how much loss Harry had had to endure in his life, and that, along with the constant threat of Voldemort, had been too much for him. He was collapsing inward, losing touch with who he was. Hermione hadn't told anyone, but she had worked with Harry, gradually weaning him off the potions and sitting up with him for hours on end each night, keeping him talking so he didn't go and score more potions or hurt himself trying. He wouldn't get any further help, so Hermione had to make it her own personal mission to ensure he was looking after himself. Ron had very little idea how bad things were. Harry only opened up to him once Hermione had seen him through the worst of it. He was doing well, clean, and happier. She loved to see it. So in all the things they had going on, Hermione hadn't really dated. She had a few one-night stands after Ron, but it was hard to do during the unrest, and she hadn't had time anyway. She had always been dedicated to doing the right thing, to being the logical one, the reliable one. Draco Malfoy was not a logical choice, but he was a choice she really wanted to make. She didn't know how she could just walk away from him, to know he existed and that he made her feel the way he did. He had set a fire within her, the way nothing had before. She looked over at him, and she felt a pull, an invisible string, one that had always been there, but that she had not known to follow until now. He looked at her as though he could read her thoughts. "I'm not worth it, Granger," he said. "Don't give it all up for me." Hermione stood up and came around to face him. Draco raised his eyes, and she saw how much he wanted her, how desperate he was to give in, to say yes. There was such a fragile hope there. Hermione was amazed at how Draco could flip between being so powerful, so dominant, to showing such a fear of vulnerability, of letting himself have the things he wanted. What happened to him? She wondered. "Let me decide what I want to give up and what I want to keep," she said, and her voice was firm. "Whatever this is between us, Draco, no one else needs to know. It can just be ours. We can keep it for ourselves." She stepped forward to straddle him, wrapping her legs around his waist, her bare skin pressed against his, and she kissed him. She ran her fingers through his hair. She slipped her tongue into his mouth. He only resisted for a second, tried to speak through her kisses, but then his breath came quicker, and she felt as he hardened beneath her and pushed gently against her, where she was already slick and ready for him. She lowered herself down onto him, and he groaned into her mouth. his hands dropping to grip her tightly from behind and pull her closer. She felt that same possessiveness in his grip, the way his fingers tightened around her hips, the way his eyes burned with intensity of his desire. His kisses became firmer, bruising, stealing her breath, leaving her gasping as she felt the room seem to shudder around them. And he pushed his hips up, feeling her with the thick length of him completely. Hermione moaned against his neck and squeezed herself around him, feeling like the few hours they had gone in between had been too long. She just wanted to touch him, to feel the way she felt when he was moving inside her, to look up into his beautiful gray eyes, to see the wonder on his face, the way he looked with his lips swollen and wet from her kisses, his hair sticking up in wild spikes where she had run her fingers through it. As they lay afterwards, panting and exhausted, Draco turned away from her. She watched his back, his breath moving in and out. She traced the slashes of his scars, the outlines of his muscles underneath his skin. He was still facing away when she heard him speak.
Granger, is this real?
He turned to her, and the fear in his eyes almost broke her.
Because I don't think I'll survive it if it's not.
Draco.
I need to know, Granger. Before I let myself believe it, before I give in to it. Tell me this is really what you want. Because if you say that, you're mine. I won't be able to let you go. I've waited too long for this.
Hermione swallowed as she saw the tears shining in his eyes.
Please.
His voice broke on the word. It's what I want, she replied. And it's real. She watched the way his face changed. The fear, the vulnerability seemed to vanish, replaced by a fierce, hungry look of possession. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping them around her tightly, his heart pounding against hers. Hermione closed her eyes as she felt his power ripple around them, his magic curling into spirals in the air, wrapping them both within it, enveloping them. She smiled and held him just as tightly, feeling the invisible string pull taut and tie them together. Draco didn't leave Hermione's house that day. He stayed and showered while she cooked them dinner. They sat down to eat, Draco eyeing the food ravenously, his pure-blood sensibilities preventing him from eating until she was seated and ready. She plated up their meals, unable to resist a quip about how she'd done it all by herself, no elf required, gaining herself another Malfoy eye roll. She sat then and watched in amazement at the amount of food Draco managed to inhale. He ate at least 3 times what she did. He saw her looking and shrugged.
It turns out keeping you satisfied is hungry work, Granger, he said, sending her a wink that sent an instant jolt into her core. She couldn't help smiling as she went to get some second helpings for him, feeling a small fizz of pleasure watching him eat the food she'd made with such enthusiasm. So they sat and ate together, while Hermione tried to get Draco to open up a little more about his life. He talked about Theo and Pansy, easily and enthusiastically, his voice full of love. Hermione felt almost envious of them, getting to have spent so much time with him. He asked after Blaise, and Hermione didn't sense any bitterness there. He seemed to be genuinely happy that Blaise was happy. He even spoke about Voldemort, telling Hermione about the smell of him, making her laugh in disgust at the comparisons he made. Draco really didn't like bad smells, she learned. He always smelled delicious, so that made sense. Draco asked about her parents, and she told them about how they were settling in Australia. She let him see her sadness over it, something she never felt like she could do with her own friends. He seemed to be very interested in her parents and in her relationship with them. He asked her questions about what her childhood was like, what kinds of things they did together, where they went. He asked her question after question. She wondered if it was a Muggle fascination. He seemed to never run out of questions. When she eventually went and got her old family photos out, he pored over them, touching the pictures lightly, running his fingers over the people as he flicked through album after album. He looked at photos of her father, holding her for the first time, swaddled in a blanket, a look of adoring love on his face. Her mother holding her hand as she led her into a playgroup for her first day. Hermione as a toddler building a snowman, bundled up in her snow gear, her nose red from the cold. Her father lifting her up to push the carrot nose into the snowman's face. He never seemed to get bored, going back to a certain picture and looking at them again and again, until eventually Hermione closed the album gently and distracted him with kisses, redirecting him. They talked for hours, getting to know each other in reverse, undoing all their preconceived ideas of each other. As they sat together talking, Hermione realized that she was subconsciously shifting towards him all the time. That everything she did, her focus was on Draco, the same way he seemed to be on her. He barely had to touch her before she felt the heat begin in her lower belly. She breathed in the scent of him, holding it in her lungs, and she thought that whatever magic it was that Draco possessed, it had wound its way around her heart and into her brain because she craved him like a drug. Hermione had had sex before. It had felt different, pleasant, but like going through the motions. She had enjoyed it for the intimacy, but she hadn't ever stopped to wonder how good it should really feel for her. Now she had experienced sex with Draco. She'd never be able to go back. No one would ever live up to him. Draco was reluctant to leave that night, so he didn't. He stayed. Hermione transfigured him some clothes out of some of hers, but he didn't really need them as they spent most of their time in her bed. Over the following days and weeks, they fell into a pattern. They spent as much of their free time together as they could without Hermione attracting suspicion, and they slept together every single night. Hermione realized very quickly that Draco avoided sleeping at the manor. When she questioned him, he shrugged and said that he liked it at Hermione's. He liked her bed with the patchwork quilt and the sound of people moving around in the street below, the voices, the white noise. No matter what had happened that day, he would appear just as she was getting ready for bed, freshly showered and smelling of toothpaste, then grab a hold of her and pull her towards him, showing her all the ways he had missed her that day. Hermione felt heartsick as he left every morning, hating the fact that she had spent the day pretending he didn't exist, that he didn't occupy her every thought. Her heart would jump if ever his name came up in conversation, no matter in what capacity. She just loved to hear the syllables and have an excuse to say them herself. One morning, Draco woke early and told her that he needed to get back to the manor. He had someone coming to take inventory of some art and antique pieces. He was planning to curate some to sell. Draco wanted to donate the money to charity. He was evasive when she asked which one. He just said he felt he wanted to do some good after all the bad his family had put into the world. It was the first time Draco had mentioned his parents, and Hermione hadn't wanted to ask about them, sensing a reluctance there, which she assumed was family loyalty. After all, he appeared to be close to them growing up.
He was always mentioning his father. Hermione kissed him and kissed him as he left, melting into his arms, not wanting him to go.
"Will you come later to the manor?" he asked.
Hermione shook her head. "I'm sorry, I can't. I've got to go out tonight. We're going to the Leaky Cauldron for Charlie's birthday." Draco's eyes immediately darkened. His face closed, and he was stiff as he nodded, his mouth a grim line. He stepped back slightly.
"Of course, you need to see your friends."
"I'd rather be with you," she said, painfully aware that already they had been feeling the effects of not being able to be seen together in public or even acknowledge the other's existence. "I cancel, but it's a bit of a big thing. It's the first party since no more Voldemort," she said, looking into his face and biting her lip anxiously. Draco's eyes were cold, flinty, his jaw clenching. She could see the muscle ticking there. He gave a rueful smile and pulled away from her, turning to leave.
"You're fucking welcome, Weasley," he muttered under his breath.
Hermione pulled him back to her and kissed him until he softened slightly. But he was still grumpy as he left for the manor. He apparated away with a face like thunder and a rather loud crack. Hermione instantly missed him. She went and lay in her bed for a short while, worrying. She buried her face in the bedding, breathing in the scent of him, of them, feeling her throat close slightly over the look on his face as he had left. She hated that he'd never been welcome amongst her friends, even though he was the reason for their freedom. She forced herself to stand and go shower him off her. She winced slightly as she washed between her legs. It was still taking her a bit of time to adjust to the size of him. She relished the pain, knowing who and what had caused it. After her showers, she sat down, wrapped in a towel, her hair in a turban, and filled her journals in on all the new developments between her and Draco. She needed to do it. She couldn't talk to anyone real about him. And she was so overwhelmed with her feelings for him that she just needed to get them out. Eventually, it was time to get ready. Ginny was coming to get her at 6. Hermione ran her wand over her hair, smoothing down the curls into spirals. Then she flipped her head upside down, fluffing her curls into a halo around her head, framing her face. She added some eyeliner and a stick of lipstick before changing into Muggle-style dress that Ginny had told her was in fashion. It was a silky satin material, black with thin straps, and Hermione felt rather short. She looked into the mirror, noting the way her breast swelled over the top of the neckline and how the dress clung to her narrow waist, accentuating her muscular thighs. She wished Draco was here to see her in it. The whole time she was getting ready, she tried to ignore the feeling in the pit of her stomach that she didn't want to go. She wanted to cancel, to apparate to the manor, and spend time with Draco instead. She felt like he was burned behind her eyelids. She saw him every time she blinked, little flashes of his smile, his fingers, his Adam's apple as he swallowed, all the things she had never noticed in a man before, that now seemed to be important to memorize every time she was with him. Ginny arrived in the bustle of chatter, cold air and perfume. She looked beautiful in an emerald green version of Hermione's black dress. They both wobbled on their heels as they apparated to the Leaky Cauldron. Neither of them used to wearing them. There hadn't been much call for 6-inch heels the previous year. It was a cold night, and Hermione could see her breath puffing out in front of her. She was glad she had worn her outer robes over her tiny dress. The pub was warm and welcoming. Their section transformed for Charlie's party with banners and balloons. There was a band playing, loudly blasting out songs that Hermione recognized from both wizarding and Muggle musicians. She and Jenny removed their coats as they entered the warm, damp air of the pub and were greeted by several jaws dropping. The wizarding boys' eyes bugged out of their heads as they took in the Muggle-style dresses. Blaze motioned being shot in the heart from across the bar, dramatically falling onto the floor. Hermione pulled at her hem self-consciously, wishing she was more like Jenny, confident and sexy, as she danced her way across the pub to Blaze, who looked like all his Christmases had come at once. Hermione greeted Charlie, giving him a small wrapped birthday gift, a pair of cufflinks from a magical jeweler she had discovered in Hogsmeade. The ones she had brought for Charlie consisted of a thick, handmade silver ring with 3 linked leaf shapes to signify protection as he went back to his job with the dragons in Romania, now that the threat in London had been reduced. Hermione heard Ron calling her name across the pub and went to stand with him at the bar. He hugged her warmly and offered to buy her a drink. She accepted and wandered away from the bar a few minutes later, sipping at the fire whiskey, her eyes darting around as she took in all the people she loved, celebrating together, free from fear. It was an incredible feeling, but Hermione couldn't help thinking of Draco, wondering what he was doing alone at the manor. The night progressed in typical Weasley fashion, loud, warm, and happy. Hermione sat on the bar stool and watched Ginny dance with Blaze, who looked like he was several fire whiskeys deep, his tie wrapped around his head as he played the air guitar, sliding on his knees across the makeshift dance floor. Harry and Ron were nearby, hunched together at a small table, sipping their drinks as they chatted, heads bent close to each other, their knees touching, their lips brushing the other's ear as they strained to be heard over the music. Ron offered his drink to taste, and the way he watched Harry's mouth as he sipped reminded Hermione so much of Draco and the way he watched her, a hungry look of desire. Hermione felt a pulse low in her abdomen as she thought of Draco, the way his eyes tracked her, the way he sometimes looked at her like he wanted to eat her. She bit her lip and looked at her watch, wondering how early she could slip away. She was starting to feel quite tipsy herself. She sat and let herself get lost in thoughts of him for a moment, zoning out of any conversation. She got so lost that, for a moment, she almost thought she caught the scent of him on the air, the smell of bonfires, a sweet apple undertone. She breathed deeply, trying to catch it again, but it was gone. She rose and moved around the bar, chatting to various people, tugging slightly at her dress as it rode up her thigh and cursing Ginny. After about 10 minutes, she became aware of a creeping sensation along her spine, the feeling of being watched. She looked around the bar, feeling suddenly wary on her guard. Her eyes settled on 2 men sitting on the stool over in the corner. She didn't recognize them. One was looking around the pub with interest, blue eyes sparkling with amusement as he watched the drunken wizards on the dance floor, Blaze now positively swaying. But the other wasn't looking anywhere except at her. His eyes were hard, staring intensely, following her as she continued walking back to Harry and Ron. Hermione frowned, feeling slightly uncomfortable. Ginny came then and grabbed her by the hand. "Come on, Hermione," she slurred. "Stop being boring. Come dance." Hermione tried to protest, but Ginny was strong, bolstered by the shots she had been doing with Blaze, and she yanked Hermione towards the dance floor. Hermione gave in and followed Ginny, laughing and joining in with Ginny's dance moves. She was aware of the man still staring at her. Every time she looked up, he was still laser focused on her. She'd had half a mind to go ask him what his problem was, but instead, she chose to ignore him and dance to the music, letting the alcohol she had consumed flow in her veins, feeling the heavy bass in her feet. She couldn't help sneaking a glance back over to the man. There was something about him, something familiar, but she couldn't place him. She wondered if he had gone to Hogwarts, maybe a younger year. When she looked back over, both men were gone. She searched the now full dance floor, looking to see if he was there. She could still feel the crawling sensation of being watched, of eyes on her. She decided to head back to the bar area towards her friends. She began pushing her way through the packed dance floor, squeezing past the heavy throng of sweating bodies. Hermione pressed forward and suddenly collided hard with someone, stood stock still on the dance floor. She raised her eyes from the broad chest, blue button-down shirt, up to look into the face of the man who had been staring at her. Her hands were still pressed up against his stomach, where she'd put them out as she had banged into him. The man looked down at her, the unfamiliar nose, the strange lips, curving up into a smile. But the eyes she was looking into weren't unfamiliar. They were clear, almost unnaturally silver. Hermione took a deep breath, and then she knew without a doubt who had been staring at her. She smiled. He was here. Draco? The polyjuice version of Draco smiled, and she could tell immediately by the quirk of his lips before he even spoke. Want to dance, Granger? She stared at him, her mouth open in shock as he leaned in closely to her ear, her body responding in a strange way. She knew it was Draco. He sounded like Draco, smelled like Draco, and he had Draco's eyes. But the lips that brushed against her ear belonged to a stranger. The hand that came up to run slowly, deliberately down the silk of her dress, along her waist and down the curve of her ass. They weren't Draco's. They were a stranger's hands, moving the way Draco's would. You look incredible, he said. His voice was low. It was practically a growl. Despite the pumping music, Hermione heard him clearly as he moved closer to her, his body crowding hers. She leaned in, his fingers gripping her hip. This fucking dress. She brought her arms up around his neck. You're making me lose my shit, he said, and his other hand came up now, running over her body, a thumb grazing her breast, making her shiver. Hermione stopped caring that his behavior was questionable, that he had felt he needed to come here to watch her. She forgot that he didn't look like Draco because he was Draco, and her body was responding the way it always did to him. So when he pulled her close, she arched her back, pushing her breast into his chest and her ass into his hand. She let the music guide her, and she began to move against him in time to the music. One of Draco's thighs found its way between hers, pushing her dress up slightly, and she smiled as she felt him begin to move to the music too. The charmed strobe lights moved over their faces as they danced, their bodies moving with the beat. Hermione's pulse thundered in her ears as she felt the stranger growing hard against her hip, the fluid movement of his body as he danced. Obviously, Draco had perfect rhythm. She lifted her hair off her neck as he leaned in, trailing kisses below her ear and down. She moved against him, feeling the friction building between them. Draco's hands roamed over her body now, as his hips moved in time with hers. He pushed his face into her neck, and she heard snippets of the things he was panting into her ears, even over the music. Feels so good, Granger. Need to take you home now. This fucking dress. She lifted her arms as she danced, not sure she was going to lose herself right there onto Draco's thigh, and half certain he was well on his way too. His eyes were closed. He looked almost like he was in pain. Hermione felt the crushing disappointment as the song they were dancing to ended, and a different one came on, breaking the spell. Hermione suddenly remembered where she was, and she opened her eyes. Her friends were all sat opposite where she was dancing, their mouths agape as they watched Hermione Granger dirty dancing with a stranger, rubbing herself on his thigh as he pulled her in with one hand on her lower back
and another gripping her hair as he ground himself into her. Harry's face was white. Ron's mouth had fallen open. Ginny looked positively amazed, her eyes shining with excitement as she mouthed to Hermione from across the pub, "What the fuck?" She clapped her hands together with excitement, thinking that Hermione had finally found a man. "If only you knew which man I've found," Hermione thought, and gave a slightly drunken giggle. Draco looked up now, his eyes full of desire, barely even aware of where he was until he too clocked her friends. He stepped back from her, just as someone else approached them, the other stranger. He had flashed Hermione a cheeky grin. "Hello, Theo," Hermione said, her hands on her hips. "Fancy seeing you here, Granger," the stranger replied with a wink. "Malfoy, we need to go," he said. "The polyjuice will be wearing off soon." Draco looked reluctant as he stepped away from Hermione. "I'll come back to the manor in an hour," Hermione whispered in his ear as he made to leave and headed towards the entrance. She didn't notice Cormac McLaggen approach Draco, thinking he was a stranger. Didn't hear what he slurred into Draco's ear, his own eyes roving greedily over Hermione. The only thing she did see was Cormac's eyes as they flew wide open, just as stranger Draco's fist connected with his face, sending a spray of blood into the air, and all hell broke loose.